I'm going to be talking about what I personally think is very much wrong with this game. But before I get to that, I want to mention all the things I think it does well. Eevee and Pikachu are both extremely cute. There's lots of ways of interacting with them, and the biggest focus of the game is making you feel like your starter is your partner. You can dress up your avatar as well as your starter Pokemon in all sorts of clothing and accessories. You can pet them, you can feed them, and they react to the world around you and respond in an adorable fashion. Whether or not this is a feature you care about, it's entirely optional, and evidently lots of care went into it, so big kudos for that. Your starter Pokemon will detect hidden items on the field. In my case, Eevee's tail springs upwards, which is a subtle and practical solution to the clunky item finder of yore. Pokemon that follow you around, in addition to your starter who will spend most of their time on your hat or shoulder, can forage for berries while you roam. I found this both useful and cute. You can ride some of your Pokemon, such as Arcanine and Rapidash, and it is indeed much faster than walking, plus it just feels awesome. Pokemon are scale better, so an Onix will tower over a Pikachu, be it in battle or in the overworld. You can see the Pokemon out in the world, and avoiding or bumping into them is entirely up to you. Personally, I saw this as a positive thing. While the layout of Kanto remains disappointingly the same, down to everything being pretty much square-shaped, interiors for important buildings can get pretty interesting looking. Erica's Gym is a good example of this. Technically, this is the best looking Pokemon game to date, but I'm gonna come back to this point later on. Now, onto what's wrong with this game. The catching system. Pokémon Go was a huge success, so it doesn't surprise me that Nintendo wanted to take a look at what defined that game and see if they could implement it into their core series. It doesn't surprise me, but it does disappoint me. It is the invariably tone-deaf result from board meetings populated by zero gamers. The catching system experience ranges from underwhelming to extremely frustrating. The first dozen Pokemon species or so that you encounter is absurdly easy to capture. They don't move, and basic Pokeballs will almost always work on the first or second try. Because you don't have to weaken a Pokemon beforehand, nor can you, capturing these is just busy work. It is uninvolved. Gradually, they will begin to demand a small amount of interaction from you. They'll swipe Pokeballs away, hop around, and most annoyingly, run away. As you progress through the game, you'll run into an increasingly higher number of species with a lower catch rate. You can feed the wild Pokemon to make them easier to catch, use your best ball, throw them just right, but continuously fail. And because they run away after a few failures, this can be a tedious ordeal. There are no wild battles. Now, I've heard a lot of opinions on the matter, but one I want to focus on is the idea that it doesn't matter that much. The thing about wild battles is that they don't exist in a void. Stripping them away from the game does remove critical elements that the player base is accustomed to. There's a catharsis that comes from being able to engage a wild Pokemon and crush it for experience points. There's a rhythm, and at times an element of tension that comes from having to fight wild Pokemon as opposed to just trainers. In caves and such, managing your party's health and power points gave you something to do. It created a barrier, a challenge. And while I'm not going to claim Pokemon was a difficult and punishing game up until now, I also don't feel like removing what challenge was in place represents a positive direction for this series. On the topic of challenge, the trainers themselves, your only source of Pokemon battles, are complete pushovers. In my playthrough, I never lost a battle. In fact, let me emphasize that I never even came close to losing. My starter Pokemon never fainted, and because of its ridiculously overpowered move pool and friendship-based abilities, it essentially soloed 99% of the game. Based on how much they like you, your starter will shrug off attacks entirely, cure status effects, or survive with 1 HP instead of fainting. When you consider how underleveled every opponent is, you can imagine how impossible it is to ever feel threatened, let alone face defeat. That's another problem I had with the game. The fact that despite there being no traditional method of grinding, my party was almost always several levels above everything I was fighting against. This was compounded by the fact that you're given ridiculously good 90 power, 100 accuracy moves with insane type coverage as early as Cerulean City. Finally, there's objectively less depth to Pokemon battles themselves with the removal of every innovation introduced since Generation 2 and 3. At times, playing this game felt more like being a tourist in Pokemon Yellow, a game which was itself an easier version, or more approachable if you choose to see it that way, of Pokemon Red and Blue. You'll never wonder or struggle for 1 second over where to go next. Even if you've been living under a rock and have never played the original games, the The linear progression, coupled with the overly helpful hints from NPCs that highlight the relevant text in a comedic, almost passive-aggressive manner, will ensure you always know where to go next. While it's true that Let's Go looks better than any Pokémon game that came before, it also looks a heck of a lot like the Sun and Moon engine with better lighting and high resolution. For a Switch game, this is incredibly underwhelming. After playing Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey, and Xenoblade Chronicles 2, it's quite simply not up to snuff. A lot of this isn't down to the graphics per se, but the scope of the game. They could probably get away with this look if the game was more ambitious, with a vast open world to explore as opposed to cramped, square-shaped small towns littered with small, square-shaped patches of grass and little roads connecting everything. I feel like most people aren't aware of the fact that Pokémon is the highest-grossing media franchise on the planet. It's higher than Star Wars. It's higher than Hello Kitty. Nintendo has the money, and the money is coming from this series. So how come the production value of a Pokémon game is so small? Where's Pokémon Breath of the Wild? Back when X and Y came out on the 3DS, there was a visible jump in visual fidelity. The first main series entry in which we could see Pokémon in 3D. And while for the most part, the formula and boundaries of the series' design remained largely the same, at least we knew it was somewhat limited by the platform itself. At the end of the day, Let's Go adds nothing meaningful to the series, actively removes features we've grown accustomed to, and overall feels like a neutered experience for $20 more. It's comforting to assume the 2019 game will be everything we want it to be, that it'll check all the boxes for what we expect out of a Pokémon game. This may be true, but I find that it's also sad. Let's Go sets the bar so low that we'll be happy to get something more in line with what we're used to, rather than demand more and push for a product that stands shoulder to shoulder with the best titles on the Nintendo Switch.